fact that that has gone through the roof since COVID was telling us the fact that they want to really know what is kicking off.
Yeah.
You know, what do I really need in the future? Do I need more space? Do I need less space? If I have less space and we're trying to force a return to the office, am I going to run out of space? I think I've said enough that I don't think we ever will.
No.
But actually getting that mathematical equation correct
Yeah.
is important. We've not met anyone who's caught a cold yet.
Gotcha. Well, it's career-defining decisions, right?
Only a lot.
Yeah. You know, this is multiple millions of pounds, and it's career-defining decisions.
But to do a study for a few £1,000s and saving several millions, for me, that's a no-brainer. And the smart businesses, I think, are realising the value of understanding what I need, because it goes back to people, process, place. It's about people. There's the cultural bit, there's a behavioural bit. It's about process. What am I doing? How often? With whom? And where? And therefore, how much of it do I need? And what does it look like? And how does it have to work? So you just mentioned having a big space that you could subdivide into little spaces.
Chris, welcome.
Nice to see you, Chris.
Welcome to the podcast, and welcome to London. Obviously, you're, don't get down here that often, do you?
Occasionally. It's a day out for me these days, yes.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Thanks for coming in. I always start these off by saying, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm a designer by background. I co-run a interior architect's practice based in Stratford-upon-Avon. We work in the commercial sector only, so we don't do residential. It's commercial design ready for fit out. So we don't actually build anything, we don't supply anything, but we provide the intelligent information for offices to be refurbished. We may work with an architect to help in the design of a new build. The key thing about us, though, is that we follow an evidence-led design approach. So we look to learn about our clients rather than just assume things. We do analysis through online surveys, through workshops, interviews, sometimes on-site observation studies. Sometimes we use technology. Sometimes the client uses their own technology to understand utilization of space, to understand activity in particular. And then we turn that into a brief, and then we respond with the creative piece. So there's the science at the beginning. We create the brief, turn that into hopefully a creative solution, ready for someone to implement the design.
I love it. This conversation is so relevant, and we go down rabbit holes with this particular chat all the time. And the thing I really want to try and nail down, if there is such a way of doing this, is what is the evidence showing us at the moment with regards to a return to work type policy? We're seeing lots of organisations pushing people back into the office. There was a big shift post-COVID. What does the evidence say? And what are you experiencing from your field?
Okay, it's a really good question and very, very, very relevant in the commercial world at the moment. We've done countless studies since the outbreak of the initial pandemic, so much so that our research or our stats feed into the British Council for Office's own research papers, because there is so much data that we've collected. And it is what you just asked me, almost is the number one question. What's everybody else up to? I thought it was going to be really easy to answer that 4 years ago. It couldn't be any more different.
Well, because people are involved.
Well, people are involved, and also everybody was in the same boat kind of throughout 2020. But 5 years on, I think one of our strap lines is one size does not fit all. That couldn't be any truer than it is at the moment. And people think we were at 100% capacity utilization of space pre-COVID. We weren't even close. If I was to say to you that the majority of average utilization rates Monday to Friday, So across a 5-day week, and that has this, there is a change here slightly, but across a typical 5-day week, it was somewhere between 30 and 50, 55%.
Yeah,
And the peak, I think the highest peak we got was 68%.
crazy.
So pre-COVID, we were nowhere near the kind of full capacity, which is what people think it was. It couldn't be. People are off sick, people are on holiday, people work in the field.
Yeah.
So they're not in the office anyway, but they may be assigned a position, a desk. And there was this, again, pre-COVID, there was this inclination to own your workstation. Why? And a couple of our clients have since said, well, they want remote working. Well, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah,
Because, if there's an opportunity to rethink how we repurpose how we use our spaces, we're going to do it. And the clever ones, the smart ones, have done that. I would say we're not quite back at pre-COVID utilization rates, but we're not far off.
Gotcha.
Our data's anything to go by. We've just produced a document called the Dynamic Workplace, which is going to be referenced by the British Council for Offices in their utilisation paper, which comes out, I think, in May. We've listed a whole load of studies in chronological order, and you can clearly see the pattern forming, whereby we are heading towards certainly moving well out of the COVID era into a post-COVID era, but actually that's just, I think it's going to end up at pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, and pre-COVID levels is actually only 65%, right?
Absolute tops.
So success is not 100% utility.
No.
It's actually just over half.
Well, there's a certain US bank,
I think we all know who you're referring to there.
and their CEO was, well, it must be almost 2 years ago now, was adamant they are going to return to the office. And everyone's working in the office 5 days a week. Their main office in the UK is in London, but they have a secondary location in Birmingham. I can tell you now, it's barely 50% full at any time.
Did you see his leaked audio?
I've read transcripts.
it's
I've read transcripts.
It
Yes,
is brilliant.
I mean it's, Alan Sugar's the same. He wants people back in the office. The reason why he's saying it, I wouldn't disagree with. For some organisations, collaboration, sharing of ideas, the learning aspect for newbies, not just necessarily young people, but anyone who's just joined a new organisation, the learning aspect is fundamental, I think, to the person's development in their career, but also to the business as well.
Yeah.
So the reason why people need to go back, I get, but just to have bums on seats, I don't get that part.
Yeah, there's a
at all.
difference between being there and showing face versus being there and being productive. It's two different questions. Even within my own organisation, we're asking people to be in, because frankly, you have those water cooler moments where you're sat next to each other, and even Joanna, who you're meeting here, it's people in the office, and we can talk about the upcoming podcast, how we're going to do it. But you don't get that if you have to start a Teams call and say, let's talk about our guests next week. It just doesn't happen.
If the pandemic had struck 10 years ago, I really don't know how we would have coped. I'm not sure we would have coped. I'm not sure it would have been as easy to implement home working in the way that they had to. I get it why we had to. I personally didn't enjoy it because I've always been a remote worker, and I like my freedoms. But Teams certainly got us out of the pickle at the end of the day, and it still has a purpose today without a shadow of a doubt. The difficulty lies in an organisation like ours, where we hold blue sky thinking workshops, creative sessions. They really don't happen on Teams. You've got to get together. But actually, there are times where, well, it's a run-of-the-mill meeting. We're just going through fortnightly meetings on site or something that we're not actually discussing much other than process.
Yeah.
And for that, why travel whatever distance?
Yeah.
And particularly someone like us, we cover the whole country and Europe as well. So, if I can save a flight to somewhere in Europe, or a train visit, or a day out the office, Teams is great.
Yeah.
It is brilliant. And like I say, how we would have coped throughout the pandemic, I just don't know.
No, well, Zoom quizzes got us through it, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Let's not go
No,
there.
that's a nightmare. And so, what's really interesting? This conversation, honestly, I could talk about this for days. But what are people doing with regards to their design of their workspace, considering everything that we've just spoken about? And at the risk of sounding super naive, what I don't mean is beanbags, table football and darts boards. What I mean is, what are they doing with regards to infrastructure? How are they encouraging people back in without putting slides in the office?
Okay, I think if utilization of space was poor pre-COVID, another thing that existed pre-COVID without a doubt was this generic approach to design, the fact that there's one size fits all, and therefore it must work for the IT people, it'll work for marketing people. Oh, it must be the same for finance people, and it's all about a sea of desks because we've got to give everyone a workstation. It isn't. It never has been. And I think I think the whole world of a future environment couldn't be further away from a seas of desks.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not about that. And I'm not saying that open plan isn't good. It's just about finding the right level of open plan. And I think there's definitely, in terms of the work settings that you'll see in environments being created today, and certainly post COVID, it is more about offering choice. It's about offering a variety of spaces depending on the activities that need to take place when someone does go in the office. And it's really key to make the office a place of destination. It's somewhere where people want to go. So, and I'm not saying the commute isn't important, because the cost of a commute is to certain people, probably most people, but it's about what's at the end of the commute. That's more the point.
Yeah.
And we're certainly trying to understand. Again, it goes back to the analysis piece. What are you trying to create? What do you do? It's about people, process, and place. Therefore, if you understand what needs to happen, you can understand, one, how much space do you actually need at the end of the day, and two, how might that space be divided up?
Yeah.
And without a doubt, just about every. If I can't think of a post-COVID project that didn't involve recalibrating the environment. And sometimes it has meant a reduction, a consolidation, but not always. We've worked on projects where clients have either had to keep the same amount of space or want to keep the same amount of space, but just want to plan it out in a different way, spread people out rather than planning in loads of workstations and squashing people together and reducing the density.
Yeah.
Because that's not what's going to entice people back into the office.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about having fun. Certain clients, certain big social media companies and ad agency that we have huge internet platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
They entice people with food, and they've told me just recently, we're not changing that plan. We're going to keep offering people free food, and if it helps them come back into the office, great.
We've seen it. I've been in some of these big technology companies they attract Gen Z and millennials and stuff like that, and within their office it is a village in the office. There are food stations, there are cookery classes, there are sleep pods. There, could, I mean, you could probably cancel your rent in London and just live in the office, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's probably going a bit far, but you want to get out of the office as well, get a life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. It's fundamentally what you're doing there is offering choice, giving people the ability to decide how they want to spend their day, what do they have to do in that day, how many people do they have to meet. It's interesting. I've got a 28-year-old. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
28-year-old who's just got married, but she joined an American organization that does satellite navigation stuff.
Right.
And she joined them about 3 years ago, so had only just come out of university, and they said so 3 years ago. So 1.5, 2 years post the initial pandemic outbreak, she was going in the office 5 days a week, and the guys were going up to her saying, "Hey, Steph, why are you coming in 5 days a week?" She says, "Well, how else am I going to learn what you're all about?" She says, "You're only in on a Monday, you guys are only in on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and that guy over there only comes in on a Friday.
Yeah.
I've got no choice but to come in every day, otherwise I'm not going to meet you all." And so it's interesting how behaviours have altered.
Yeah.
There is one thing that we are monitoring, coming back to your question again, and that is the fact that whilst utilisation rates are, as I said, creeping slowly back up to pre-COVID levels, what is interesting, and it's probably the single biggest challenge everybody has in the country at the moment, every business that I know of, is what days are they in?
Yeah.
Now so the whole piece about demand management, that is, and design can play a part, technology can play a part, but I think it's more about how do you culturally get that point across to get people to work on the right days, the same days,
Yeah.
so that you can spread it out. And even from an environmental perspective, I was at a conference 18 months ago and somebody, I forget their name, came up with a fantastic statistic. So I think it's 168 hours in a 7-day week.
Right.
And if people only come in 2 days a week, they're only actually using, out of those 168 hours, they're only using the office for between 16 and 24 hours.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally a shocking statistic.
that-
If you think about usage
160
of,
hours.
oh, it's just terrible. It's, we've got, they're the kind of issues I think we really need to focus on and think about. And this weekend, because we're just about to kick off with Easter,
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of people have learned how to turn every weekend into an Easter weekend.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question because, you're talking about 168 hours across the working week. And then, you own a business, I own a business, and we also have a commercial mindset on lease, right, and rent and stuff like that. What are people doing around management of people's time in the office and balancing that versus ROI on the lease? What's the general consensus there? So I know of, and I'll give some context to the question. I know of one particular client who basically just closes the office down on a Friday. Now that doesn't mean that this client stops paying the lease. They have to pay the lease. But is there a conversation around that topic, which is, I'm actually only using the office for these many days, or are companies saying, well, this is how we need to utilize the office because there's a commercial spin on it as well? I don't know. What's the general consensus around that piece?
Okay, this is where the challenge exists or lies for most organisations. You can adopt the bank we referred to earlier on. You could adopt their approach. I want you all in 5 days a week. End of. Ain't going to happen. As I've already stressed, it wasn't there pre-COVID. So why is it going to be there post-COVID? It does go back to demand management. It does go down to, do you use a carrot and stick approach, entice people back? Do you encourage them to come back because there's something to come back to? It's a really tricky challenge, without a doubt. I only know of one client. They shut down at midday on a Friday, that the entire organisation. They do that not because there's any benefit on renegotiating leases or rents or anything like that. They just think that they get more out of their people when they work only 4.5 days a week. Now, I'm sure that they've calculated somehow, whether people are more efficient or not. The majority are maintaining still a 5-day week.
Yeah.
And it does go back to activity again in terms of which these people need to be in those 5 days. We've got one client that, interestingly, we've done 3 studies with them. They're only one of 2 clients where we've done 3 studies in the last few years. And what's interesting is the first study 3 years ago, we identified 2 clear user groups where we had effectively 8 workstations supporting 10 people across 3 days. And then you've got another group where you've got 5 workstations supporting 10 people across 2 to 3 days. We did the same study a year later, and those 2 user groups began to split up into another 2 clearly identified user groups. When we did the same study a year ago, those 4 user groups were distinctly different, But what was interesting, the days which they were coming in had shifted as well.
Gotcha.
And it all revolved around what they did. So the ones that are in more than others were designers.
Yeah.
People who, like ourselves, held workshops, needed to share an awful lot of information and data with each other because they're all developing things.
Of course.
And the ones that didn't need to be in were IT, interestingly,
Yeah.
because they were using technology far more, I wouldn't say aggressively. They're able to use the IT to help them work in a more flexible way. And that's fair enough. That's that's how they work. That's how they work.
Yeah, it is interesting, and we've got right down the rabbit hole of human behaviour and the effect of the office on human behaviour. I do want to take it back to what you specialise in, which is the design of that specific space. And you mentioned technology. What's the effect of technology over these past few years in terms of the way that you're A, utilising it to design your own offices, but B, utilizing it for the use of the office, so your client's use of technology?
Okay, I think I mean, obviously there are different forms of technology. We've talked about Teams and the benefits that brings, but also the inefficiencies it can bring in. So the benefit is, you can hold lots of Teams meetings and not have to travel, and people can work from home. Great benefit. Use it a lot myself. What we have found, though, is that, and this is where it impacts on the design of the space, people don't like holding Teams calls in the open plan. So the whole notion of booths and pods and little telephone spaces have risen dramatically. And a number of people said to me 2 years ago, "Oh, is that just a correction?" In the early days, without a doubt, it was, because people were trying to get others to come back in the office. But can you shut up, please, with your Teams call, because you're really putting me off. I'm writing a report here, and you kind of think, well, you've got to respect everyone's needs. So again, it goes back to the choices in terms of quiet spaces, cellular spaces, bizarrely. Not that it's an office somebody owns, but it's just from a practical perspective. But then there's also technology can be used to see, how many people are in the office as well.
Yeah.
We use that sometimes, and even access control. It's great to compare actual access control data with our own observational studies to see, well, or if we do an online survey, how are people perceiving themselves in terms of how they work? And there was some clear patterns forming there over the last few years as well. I think the big one where technology, and I saw an example just a few weeks ago at a university where you've got hybrid meeting? I guess you could call it a hybrid meeting, where you've got some people in the office, they're in a meeting room, and then you've got some people joining in online. Now, this was in a learning setting, but it was fascinating to watch how the technology was really clever inside the room, because it was able to pick out people no matter where you sat in the space, but it also enabled the people who were joining in online to feel included and actively involved in that learning session. And I have to say, from my own experience, that's actually really hard to do. I've hosted meetings where we're doing maybe a workshop or a meeting or a presentation, and you got half the people are joining in online, and then half the people are in the room. And I'll be the first to admit that I will ignore the people who are on the line, because it's so hard.
You don't get the human nuances, do you? You don't get that non-verbal communication.
It's so easy to forget the person on the screen.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing them day in, day out, which I don't personally. The people online will get left out.
That's why I prefer doing the podcast face to face.
Good.
so much, despite the fact that I own an AV company. And from your side of things, you're obviously working through the REBA stages with your clients. At what point do you start bringing that? Because you probably agree with me that technology plays a major part of the functionality of a space. At what point do you bring technology consultants into your design thinking, and what are the pros and cons of you bringing them in at that point?
Okay, so in terms of the Reba stages, I would say there isn't a particular stage at which a technology consultant would be brought in. We've got a project live right now for a certain Premiership football club, and to say that the reception experience is one of the worst we've ever experienced is an understatement.
Wow,
It is shocking.
spending
So
all the money on players,
I couldn't possibly comment.
or not. I don't know who it is. So,
They're doing okay at the
okay,
moment.
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I know who you support. So, but it's in terms of how we use technology. In their case, it actually influenced the not only the brief, but the feasibility of what we're doing before we even get all our marker pens out, because it affected the way that that particular building is used. So, and in their case, it's about a virtual receptionist. They were kind of operating that anyway. We said, well, why don't you go to full hog, move the receptionist upstairs to a really nice, funky bit of space where people can really be made to feel at home, look at what that club is all about. So, in that case, the experts were brought in really, really early
Yeah.
because we needed to know, one, from the security perspective, two, how might this work? How can we really make this a funky experience, which they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so we haven't even reached concept stage.
Yeah.
It's just it influenced how how that particular building is being used, right from the word go.
Understood. Because it's so important to the functionality of the building itself.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it is going to be a great experience. We've been able to play with the space and the amount of volume of space we've got. That once they've signed in, the technology done its part. It even can tell the person who they're coming to see, when they're in. Oh, they've walked into the reception area, which is a kind of semi-break area as well, so they can help themselves. They've got through the security aspect already. Their host can make their way down to meet them, and yeah, without a doubt, in the old days, you'd have had some pretty expensive players that they're trying to entice to that club, and it was a shocking experience.
Yeah.
This is going to be wow, right from the word go.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but yes, they have won quite a few trophies over the years. But they're not going to beat you this year.
Well, I think it's got a little bit boring, hasn't it? Really, it's boring winning all the time.
I couldn't possibly comment.
So I mean, that to me, Sal, we've been talking about smart buildings for a decade, and up until this point, it's all been quite airy-fairy what a smart building actually is. This to me sounds a little bit more along the lines of the fact that we really are getting quite smart with the technology that we're deploying. There's a route for somebody to go into reception. There's a parking space for them. There's a very clear plan via the use of technology that guides that person into that building.
Definitely, and also how they're looked after. So, the building management systems are far smarter these days. I've already mentioned about the way sound is handled in this, let's say, in this teaching environment at this particular university. Why wouldn't you use technology to control temperature, for example? It's one of the biggest moans, always has been. I'm too cold. I'm too warm. This is too dark for me. This is too light for me. Well, and I've already stressed the fact that, if people are coming in 2 or 3 days a week, how inefficient are buildings anyway? So smart building management systems are going to play their part.
Yeah.
And if we're going to try and get to any remotely close to this net zero carbon agenda, technology is going to have to play a far harder role.
You need to measure it.
Exactly.
Speaking of measuring, this is always an interesting conversation. You guys are obviously involved in concept design, needs analysis, putting the design together, handing it over to a fit-out company. Where do you step away, and how do you know that the design that you've put together, based on the fact that you are quite a data-led company, how do you know that what you've designed works?
That can be done in a number of ways, and it's a shame. not many clients actually use us for this. Only when they realise they've made a mistake do they come back to us. One, within the Reba stage gates, Reba 7 is where we go back and do analysis again. I think I mentioned just a few minutes ago that we've got 2 clients that use us both pre-project, sometimes just during the project, and certainly post-project, so that we can do some gap analysis to understand have our ideas or our strategy as it actually worked. And I say 2 clients, we've done 3 studies over the last few years. So that's a good one to measure the success of a strategy or a design that we've rolled out. We've got one client that we've worked with over the last 15 years. We did a complete EMEA rollout of 17 offices in 15 countries,
Right.
across Europe, South Africa, and the Middle East. And they were very smart because they did 2 things that nobody else, I think, has done with us. One, we did a pre-project study, we did a post-project study, and then we used the gap analysis to inform the next
one.
location,
Yeah.
and then the next location, and the next one. So it was like a rolling process.
Do review, apply. Yeah.
Correct.
Do
Yeah,
review, apply.
exactly. Yeah, and then and what's good is doesn't work, you cut out. What works, you think, it's either worked or actually we could make it work even harder. And actually, out of that process, for example, telephone booth pods are really popular at the moment. We realised that this particular client has a really wide variety of activities, from people who just need quiet spaces to concentrate to those who are very loud on telephones. So we produced telephone booths for them 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I mean, talk about being ahead of the game,
You're
I would
You're
say.
ahead of it there, yeah.
It's but we only did it because we did the analysis in the first place. The other thing that they do, which I think is really clever, and again, people only come back to us when they realise it's not worked, is what we call journey mapping. So if somebody's come out of an office where they've got a whole array of workstations, maybe a reception area, or some cellular meeting spaces, and we've completely converted their environment so that I can think of one client off the top of my head who had those 3 types of settings, and we gave them 17, and we turned up 6 months later and we said, I would say 12 of those settings aren't being used.
Right.
Why? And they said, I think they don't know how to. And we said, it goes back to journey mapping. You can't assume that everyone's going to know how to behave in a new setting that they've never had before. And it might sound crazy, but you just can't assume.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've just got to guide them. This pan-European client did that. So they produced a WorkSmart booklet that informed their staff of exactly, what settings are available, how are they used, who are they for, how are they kitted out, and it goes back to the technology piece as well. It could just be a whiteboard, it could be just flip charts, or it could be there's some really smart stuff in there. You can contact Johannesburg and you could be in Istanbul, but you can both speak to somebody in Moscow or Krakow. So, and that's what they did. Not assuming is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And the ongoing measurement of what success looked like. So again, you mentioned it for your pan-European client. Do review, apply. I think the important part is to always make sure that what you're delivering is assessed and you make changes based on the assessment.
And also, from a technology perspective, one thing that is definitely on the increase is the way that spaces are measured and analysed. So more clients are beginning to put in, because they're not necessarily cheap, but systems where the monitor can tell how many people are in a room.
Yeah.
If there's one in this room, it could tell that there's 3 of us in here. It can't necessarily tell you what you're doing, which is where the observation piece comes in. But it can measure the way spaces are being used.
Yes.
And then therefore inform and feed into, well, if we're going to be moving, if the business is growing, how much space do we need to provide in the future?
Yeah.
Well, that's an immediate impact on your corporate real estate strategy, and it could be an influence in terms of, are we growing for the right reasons?
Yeah.
Have we got the right number of people? And then that feeds into the whole efficiency model.
We drive that a lot in terms of reading data and understanding what the rooms are used for. And like you say, it may be that you have a large space of, 24-person boardroom that's only ever used once every quarter for a 24-person meeting. So would it be a better use of that space to be able to make it a divisible room?
Yep.
You open it up when you have the big meeting, but you close it off and make it 3 different meeting rooms when you don't have a large meeting. And we're seeing loads of that divisible space stuff. The vital part is measuring it and making sure. So
exactly.
I think one of the questions I always like to ask is, if you've got clients, if you've got somebody who's, they've got a lease event coming up and they're potentially looking at alternative offices in some of the major cities, what don't they know around design, around everything that we've spoken about here? What don't they know that they should know?
It's a good question. I mentioned earlier on about making assumptions. I think the right people in the organisation who have been tasked with taking some pretty big decisions at the end of the day, I think the majority of businesses that we're talking to at the moment are really beginning to wake up and smell the coffee when it comes to not making any assumptions. And I think that's why the front end part of what we do in terms of studies and so on, the analytical piece, the fact that has gone through the roof since COVID was telling us the fact that they want to really know what is kicking off.
Yeah.
What do I really need to, in the future? Do I need more space? Do I need less space? If I have less space and we're trying to force a return to the office, am I going to run out of space? I think I've said enough that I don't think we ever will.
No.
But actually getting that mathematical equation correct is important. We've not met anyone who's caught a cold yet.
Gotcha. Well, it's career-defining decisions, right?
Only a lot.
Yeah. This is multiple millions of pounds, and it's career-defining decisions.
But to do a study, for a few £1,000 and saving several millions, for me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And the smart businesses, I think, are realising the value of understanding what I need, because it goes back to people, process, place. It's about people. There's the cultural bit. There's the behavioural bit. It's about process. What am I doing? How often? With whom? And where?
Yeah.
And therefore, how much of it do I need? And what does it look like? And how does it have to work? So you just mentioned having a big space that you could subdivide into little spaces. One of the things we've noticed since the pandemic is actually if we have lots of little spaces, go the opposite way, actually the big spaces are really popular for town halls.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is businesses are finding that's a really good way of getting people back to the office. So actually, in the old days you may have used a big boardroom, whatever, for a boardroom for a board meeting that happens at best, let's say 12 times a year, once a month. Actually, the town halls is what we're finding are far, far more relevant going forward.
We're finding the same. We're deploying loads of town halls at the moment. And in these kitchen areas, flexible spaces, it'll be IPTV sports on in the background, but then flick of a switch, it turns into a town hall space, and the CEO dials in from New York, and we're deploying quite a lot of that stuff at the moment.
And I would say from an architectural perspective, we are designing more of those types of spaces and making them fun. So that goes back to place of purpose and destination, something that people really want to go to. If they're spending $4 or $5 grand a year on a rail ticket,
you need to have a good reason to be in there, right?
I think
and it
so,
needs
yes.
to work. You can't expect people to spend all that money commuting into the office and then find that the functionality of the office is not up to scratch.
And the experience is rubbish.
Yeah.
If the experience is poor, why would you expect someone to come in? And that doesn't mean spoiling them and kind of creating a snowflake generation. It's not. It's just about respecting the fact that people should have had the experience pre-COVID.
Yeah. Chris, this has been brilliant, and like most of the time that I've spoken to you, I could probably talk to you for another couple of hours. Unfortunately, I've got Easter eggs to buy on the way home, so I can't.
Tell me about it.
I can't do that. Chris, just remind everybody what your business is and how could they get in touch with you if they want to learn a little bit more.
So we are called Square Dot. As I say, we're interior architects, interior workplace designers. You can look us up on www.squaredot.co.uk. squaredot.co.uk. Have a look at the website. It hopefully informs in terms of what we do, how we do it, and what we've done for other people. There's lots of nice imagery on there, if nothing else. We've won a whole stack of awards. In fact, we're up for one week after next
nice.
for the British Council of Offices.
Good luck.
So that's a nice project we did for Cushman Wakefield in Birmingham.
Very nice.
So hopefully that's another silver block on the windowsill
Yeah.
if we win. We'd love to hear from you. I think we've been able to help countless clients post-pandemic that have woken up and thought, my God, what do I do now? And how do I do it? So I'm sure we can do it for other people as well.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Enjoy your Easter break, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
No problem. Thank you. So we are interior architects, workplace designers. We're called Square Dot. We're based in Stratford-upon-Avon. We're a small medium organisation. You can look us up on www.squaredot.co.uk. We've helped countless organisations in the post-COVID era face some pretty amazing challenges, and I'm sure we can do it for you too. At the end of the day, we're about change, and if change is involved, it's good for you to understand how you do it, and it's good for us to do it for you.